The briefing room at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado fell silent when she walked in. At 5'2" and barely 100 pounds soaking wet, Lieutenant Junior grade Matilda Runt Voss didn't look like someone who belonged in the same room as the Marines seated around the conference table. She carried a single manila folder under her arm, her service dress blues crisp despite the San Diego heat. The 10 Marines stared. One of them, a staff sergeant with arms like tree trunks, leaned back in his chair and whispered something that made the others smirk. Matilda didn't acknowledge it. She'd heard worse. She set the folder on the table and remained standing while the room waited for whoever was supposed to run this briefing. But the minutes ticked by and nobody else arrived. Eventually, the staff sergeant cleared his throat. "You lost, sweetheart. Admin buildings across the street." Matilda met his eyes. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Another Marine, younger, couldn't hold back a laugh. "What are you, like 4'11"? Did they let you in on a waiver?" The questions always followed the same pattern. They always came before anyone asked what she actually did. Matilda had learned not to fight this part. Let them talk. Let them think they had her figured out. 5'2", she said evenly. "And no waiver." The staff sergeant leaned forward, elbows on the table. His name tape read KOVICH. "So what exactly are you doing here, ma'am?" The emphasis on the rank was just subtle enough to skirt insubordination. Matilda opened the folder and pulled out a single photograph. She placed it face down on the table and slid it toward Kovich. "3 weeks ago," she said, "a high-value target disappeared from our watch list in the Helmand province. Intel says he's planning something that'll make the Kabul airport bombing look like a warm-up. He's got Chinese backing, Russian ordnance, and a network we've been trying to penetrate for 18 months. She paused. Kovich hadn't touched the photograph. "Your squad has been tasked with direct action, insertion, extraction, and interdiction. Mission parameters are in the folder you ship out in 72 hours. Kovich finally flipped the photo. It showed a compound nestled in mountainous terrain, surrounded by what looked like civilian infrastructure. "And you are your air support coordinator." The room erupted in barely suppressed laughter. One Marine actually slapped the table. Kovich's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. "Air support coordinator. You," Matilda nodded once. "Me." She let them laugh. It was always better to let them get it out of their system early. The longer they underestimated her, the less they interrupted later when it actually mattered. Kovich wiped his eyes and looked at the other Marines like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Forgive me, ma'am, but we usually get someone with a little more," he gestured vaguely, presence for something like this. Matilda pulled another document from the folder and placed it in front of him. "This is the target package. Satellite imagery updated as of 0400 this morning. The compound has AAA emplacements here, here, and here." She pointed without looking down. "QRF response time from the nearest government outpost is 11 minutes. You'll have 8 before they're danger close." One of the Marines leaned forward to look at the imagery. His name tape read CHEN. "What's our air package?" "2 F-18 Super Hornets out of Bagram for top cover. 1 MH-60S for insertion. And me," Chen blinked. "You flying the Seahawk?" "No," Matilda let the word hang there for a moment. "I'm flying close air support in an A-10 Thunderbolt." The laughter died instantly. Kovich's expression shifted to something between confusion and disbelief. "The Warthog, you're a hog driver. 4 years, 2 deployments." She pulled out another photograph, this one showing a battered A-10 with scorched paint and patchwork repairs along the fuselage. Nose art showed a small cartoon dog with oversized teeth. Below it, stenciled in white, "Runt." "That your bird?" Chen asked. "Was. Taliban hit us with an SA-7 over Kandahar, took out the left engine and half the tail. I brought her home on one turbine and hydraulics held together with hope and duct tape." She tapped the photograph. "They retired her after that, gave me a new one. Same nose art." Kovich studied the image, his earlier amusement completely gone. "How'd you get the call sign?" "I was the smallest person in my flight class at Pensacola, by a lot. They figured it'd be funny. It stuck." She pulled the photograph back and placed it in the folder. "Any other questions about my qualifications, or can we talk about keeping you alive?" The room had gone completely quiet. Kovich exchanged glances with his Marines, then looked back at Matilda. His tone had changed. Not respectful yet, but no longer dismissive. What's the flight time to target? 90 minutes from Bagram. I'll be wheels up 30 minutes before your insertion. I'll be overhead before you hit the ground. And if we need immediate fire support, Matilda's expression didn't change. Then you call Runt, and I'll put 30-millimeter rounds exactly where you need them. Kovich leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. The skepticism hadn't entirely left his face, but something had shifted in the way he looked at her. He nodded slowly. All right, walk us through the mission profile. Matilda pulled out a tactical map and spread it across the table. Red circles marked enemy positions. Blue triangles showed the planned marine movements. A green line traced her flight path. Your insertion point is here, 3 clicks north of the compound. Terrain provides natural concealment until you reach this ridgeline. That's where you'll be exposed. She traced her finger along the route. I'll be holding at Angels 12, 20,000 feet outside their air defense envelope. You'll have eyes on from me and the Hornets. Once you initiate, I drop to attack altitude. Chen studied the map. What's attack altitude for a hog? 500 feet, maybe lower depending on the threat. Another Marine, younger than the rest, his name tape reading DIAZ, looked up sharply. That's below the ridgeline. You'll be taking fire from every direction. That's what the titanium bathtub is for. Matilda kept her voice level. The A-10 was built to take punishment. I can fly with half the aircraft missing. You can't. Kovich traced the route his team would take. What's our window for crossing this open ground? 45 seconds if you move fast, 60 if you're careful. Either way, I'll be covering the approach. Anything that moves toward your position gets the gun. What about collateral? Matilda's expression hardened slightly. Intel confirms the compound is military only. No civilian traffic within half a click. If something's moving out there, it's hostile. She pointed to the AAA positions. These emplacements are your primary concern until I neutralize them. That happens first before you cross the ridgeline. Kovich looked at his Marines, then back at the map. An extraction. Same Seahawk that drops you. Lands here 2 clicks east of the compound. I cover your exfil until you're airborne. Once the Seahawk is clear, the Hornets sanitize anything left standing. She folded the map. Questions? One of the Marines, a corporal with a scarred jawline, raised his hand slightly. His name tape read ORTEGA, Rules of Engagement. Weapons free once you initiate. No restrictions. The target is kill or capture, preference for capture if feasible. Anyone who gets in your way is a legitimate combatant. Ortega nodded. Time on target. You hit the ground at 0300 local time. Full dark, no moon. I'll have thermal imaging and FLIR. You'll have night vision. Advantage is ours if we move fast. Kovich stood up, stretching his back. The other Marines followed his lead. When do we meet the rest of the package? Matilda straightened the documents and slid them back into the folder. Tomorrow morning, 0600, flight brief with the Hornet crews and the Seahawk pilot. After that, we do a full rehearsal at the range. Kovich picked up the tactical map and studied it again. His earlier hostility had faded into something closer to professional curiosity. You really brought a hog back on one engine. Technically, it wasn't even a full engine, more like 40% of one. The turbine was shredded, but the A-10 doesn't quit. She met his eyes. Neither do I. Chen crossed his arms, looking at the photograph of her aircraft again. How many combat missions? 137, most of them danger close with troops in contact. I've put ordnance within 50 meters of friendlies more times than I can count. Never hit the wrong target. Diaz, the younger Marine, spoke up quietly. What's the closest you've ever fired to friendly forces? Matilda didn't hesitate. 18 meters. Patrol was pinned down in a compound north of Marja. Taliban had them surrounded on 3 sides. I came in low, put a gun run right along the compound wall. The Marines said they could feel the heat from the rounds passing overhead. The room was silent. Kovich set the map down. 18 meters. The GAU-8 puts out 65 rounds per second. When you're that close, precision isn't optional, it's survival. She picked up the folder. That's why I'm here. Because when you call for fire, you need someone who won't flinch. Ortega scratched his jaw, the scarred tissue pulling slightly. What happens if we can't get to the extraction point? Then I keep you alive until you can. Matilda's tone didn't invite further questions. The A-10 carries 11 hardpoints. I'll have Mavericks for armor, rockets for personnel, and 1,600 rounds of 30 mm. If you're stuck, I'll turn the world around you into a no-go zone until the cavalry arrives." Kovach studied her for a long moment. The skepticism was gone now, replaced by something harder to read. Finally he nodded. 0600 tomorrow, will be there." Matilda turned toward the door, then paused. "One more thing." The Marines waited. "The call sign isn't a joke to me. It's a reminder. People see me and think I don't belong, that I'm too small, too weak, not enough." She looked at each of them in turn. "I've spent my entire career proving them wrong. Tomorrow morning, you'll start understanding why." She left without waiting for a response. The next morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of pre-dawn darkness that made everything feel heavier than it was. Matilda stood beside her A-10 on the flight line at Bagram Airfield, running her pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. The aircraft loomed above her, ugly and purposeful, its nose painted with the snarling cartoon dog that had followed her through 2 deployments. She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the patches where maintenance crews had replaced panels damaged by ground fire. This bird was newer than her first, but it wore its scars the same way. Behind her she heard boots on the tarmac. She turned to see Kovach and his Marines approaching, their expressions guarded but no longer hostile. The Hornet pilots were already there, 2 lieutenants from VFA 115, call signs Axe and Hammer. The Seahawk pilot, a lieutenant commander named Rivera, stood off to one side with his crew chief. Matilda checked her watch. 0600 exactly. "Good morning," she said. "Let's talk about how we keep each other alive." She led them to a folding table where a detailed terrain model of the target area had been set up. Small flags marked positions and routes. Tiny aircraft models represented each element of the package. "This is the sequence," she began, pointing to the model. "At 0230, Axe and Hammer launch from Bagram and establish a combat air patrol overhead the target area at Angels 20. Their job is to sanitize the airspace and provide overwatch. At 0245, I launch. I fly direct to holding pattern here," she pointed to a spot 20 miles from the target, "and wait for your insertion." Rivera, the Seahawk pilot, leaned forward. "I launch at 0250. Flight time is 40 minutes direct. I'll be coming in from the north to mask my approach behind this ridgeline." He traced the route on the model. Kovach nodded. "And once we're on the ground." Matilda picked up a laser pointer and aimed it at the model. "The AAA positions are your first problem. I'll be monitoring your movement from altitude. The moment you cross the line of departure, I drop to attack altitude and make gun runs on these positions. 2 seconds per target, that's all it takes to silence them." Axe, one of the Hornet pilots, spoke up. He was tall and lean with sharp eyes. "What if they light you up with radar? Then you earn your paycheck." "I'll break off and you suppress with harms." She looked at him. "But I'm not breaking off unless I have to. Those Marines need those guns gone." Hammer, the other Hornet pilot, shorter and more compact than his wingman, studied the terrain model. "What about the QRF? 11-minute response time means they'll be closing fast once this kicks off." Matilda nodded. "That's where you come in. Once the Marines secure the compound and have the target, they start moving to the extraction point. That's when the QRF becomes your problem. I'll keep the compound clear. You make sure nothing reaches the Marines during exfil." Rivera pointed to the extraction point marked on the model. "I land here for 90 seconds, no more. If they're not there, I wave off and come back around." Kovach's jaw tightened. "Understood." Matilda set down the laser pointer. "Let's talk about communications. We'll be on 3 nets. Primary tactical frequency for mission coordination, secondary for emergency, and a separate channel linking me directly to Kovach's ground team. When you call for fire, I need clear instructions. Direction, distance, target description." Chen pulled out a notepad. "What's the format? Keep it simple. Runt, this is Viking 6. Enemy personnel in the open 200 meters west, danger close. I'll confirm and execute. If I need you to mark the target, I'll ask. Otherwise, stay out of my way and let me work." Diaz raised his hand slightly. "What if we can't give you accurate distance?" "Then mark with IR, strobe, or smoke. I've got thermals. I'll find you and work from there." She looked at the Marines. "But understand this, danger close means exactly that. If I'm putting rounds near your position, you stay down and trust me, I don't miss. Ortega studied the model. What's our rally point if the extraction goes sideways? Rivera answered before Matilda could. There's a wadi here, 300 meters south of the primary extraction point. Natural cover, good concealment. If I can't land at primary, I'll try there. If I can't land at all, you dig in and wait for plan B. What's plan B? Ortega asked. Matilda's expression didn't change. I turn everything around you into a parking lot until we can get another bird in. Could be an hour, could be 6. Doesn't matter, you'll be alive when it arrives. Kovich met her eyes. You sound pretty confident. I've done this before, more times than you'd believe. She gestured to the Marines. You're not the first ground team that's needed someone overhead who wouldn't leave until the job was done. Axe crossed his arms. What's your fuel status look like if we have to extend? Matilda had anticipated the question. 2 hours total on station, maybe a little more if I'm not burning fuel maneuvering hard. After that, I'll have to hit a tanker, but there's a KC-135 holding at 30,000 feet 50 miles northeast. I can tank and be back overhead in 20 minutes. Rivera nodded approvingly. Good contingency. Hammer pointed to the compound on the model. What's the structure made of? Mud brick, concrete. Reinforced concrete according to intel. Thick walls. The Mavericks will punch through if we need to open it up, but the gun is precision enough for the defensive positions. We're not leveling the place unless absolutely necessary. Target needs to be capturable. Kovich picked up one of the small flags marking enemy positions. Intel says 40 to 60 hostiles on site. What if they scatter once we initiate? Then they become easier targets. Matilda's voice was flat. The A-10 was designed to kill Soviet armor columns running across open terrain. Infantry in the open is target practice. They scatter, I track them with FLIR, and the gun does the rest. Diaz looked uncomfortable. What's it like, firing that close to friendlies? Matilda considered the question. Honest answer, it's terrifying every single time. You're putting high-explosive rounds downrange at 4,000 feet per second, 50 meters from people who trust you with their lives. If your hands shake, if you hesitate, if you're off by even a fraction of a degree, people die. Your people, she paused. But you do it anyway because the alternative is worse. You do it because they're counting on you. And you do it because you've trained for this exact moment 1,000 times and your body knows what to do even when your brain is screaming at you to pull up and fly away. The Marines were silent. Chen finally spoke. How do you deal with it, the pressure? I don't think about it while it's happening. I think about the mechanics. Airspeed, altitude, angle of attack, target tracking. I think about the numbers. When it's over, then I think about the rest, but not during. She looked at each of them. That's the deal. You trust me to be perfect when it matters. I trust you to give me good information and stay where I can protect you. We both do our jobs. Everyone goes home. Kovich set the flag back on the model. What time do we rehearse? Matilda checked her watch. Range is reserved for 0900. We'll run through radio procedures, target marking, and I'll demonstrate gun accuracy. You'll see what the A-10 can do. After that, final brief at 1400, then crew rest. Questions before we break. Ortega raised his hand. What happens if you get shot down? The question hung in the air. It was the one nobody wanted to ask, but everyone needed answered. Matilda didn't flinch. If I'm hit and can stay airborne, I'll continue the mission until you're extracted. If I'm hit and can't stay airborne, I eject and become a recovery mission. Axe and Hammer provide cover until CSAR arrives. She looked at Rivera. You're bird equipped for combat rescue. Negative, Rivera said. We're troop transport only. CSAR would come from Kandahar. 30-minute response time. Matilda nodded. Then if I go down, the mission priority doesn't change. You extract the Marines first. CSAR gets me second. I can survive on the ground for 30 minutes. Kovich frowned. That's not how we operate. Nobody gets left behind. I'm not being left behind. I'm telling you the order of operations. You complete the mission. That's what matters. Her tone left no room for argument. The target is more important than any single person on this operation. That includes me. Hammer spoke quietly. And if you're hit too hard to eject. Matilda met his eyes. Then I aim for something that matters and you finish the mission without me. The silence that followed was absolute. Finally, Kovich stood up straight, his expression hardened but not angry. That's not going to happen. We'll do our part. You do yours. Everyone comes home. Matilda didn't argue. She'd said what needed to be said. 0900 at the range. Don't be late. The group dispersed slowly, the Marines heading toward their barracks, the pilots toward the operations building. Only Kovich remained, standing across the table from Matilda. He studied her for a moment. You meant that, about aiming for something that matters. Every word. Why? Kovich asked. Why would you do that? Matilda began folding up the terrain model, her movements precise. Because I didn't get this far by being careless with other people's lives, and because the aircraft is a weapon even after I can't fly it anymore. Might as well make it count. Kovich watched her work for a moment longer, then turned to leave, but he paused at the edge of the tarmac. For what it's worth, he said without looking back, I'm glad you're the one flying cover. Matilda didn't respond, but something in her expression softened just slightly. When he was gone, she finished packing up the model and carried it back toward the operations building. The sky was beginning to lighten, pale gray turning to soft blue. She looked up at it and thought about all the missions she'd flown, all the times she'd brought her aircraft home despite everything trying to bring her down. This one wouldn't be any different. At 0900, Matilda stood on the edge of the bombing range, watching as Kovich's Marines set up target panels at various distances. The morning sun was climbing higher now, burning off the chill. Her A-10 sat on the nearby taxiway, already pre-flighted and ready. The range was a sprawling expanse of desert marked with impact craters and scorched earth from countless training runs. Axe and Hammer stood beside her, their flight suits unzipped at the collar despite the cool air. Rivera and his crew chief completed the group. All right, Matilda said, loud enough for everyone to hear. This is how it works. I'll make 3 passes. The first at 1,000 feet so you can see the approach and hear the gun. The second at 500 feet, combat altitude. The third at 200 feet, which is lower than I'd normally go, but I want you to understand what danger close actually means. Chen, standing with the other Marines near the targets, called out, How close are those targets to us? 50 meters, Matilda answered. Same distance as that patrol in Marja. When I make the third pass, you're going to feel the concussion. You're going to hear rounds snapping past, and you're going to understand what I mean when I say I don't miss. She turned to Axe and Hammer. You two will orbit overhead and call my runs, standard CAS pattern. I want the Marines to hear how we coordinate. The pilots nodded. Matilda walked toward her aircraft, pulling on her helmet as she went. The crew chief met her at the ladder, handing her the checklist. She climbed into the cockpit, the familiar smell of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid surrounding her. This was where she belonged, not in briefing rooms defending her qualifications. Not explaining herself to people who couldn't see past her size. Here, strapped into 30 tons of titanium and firepower, she was exactly who she needed to be. The engine spooled up with a rising whine that became a roar. Matilda ran through her checks, muscle memory guiding her hands across switches and instruments. Radio checks with the tower, with Axe and Hammer already airborne above the range, with Kovich on the ground. Everything came back green. She released the brakes and taxied toward the runway, the shuddering slightly as it rolled. The tower cleared her for takeoff. She advanced the throttles and the aircraft surged forward, accelerating with the kind of raw power that always surprised people who thought the Warthog was slow. Rotation speed came quickly. She pulled back on the stick and the nose lifted, the desert falling away beneath her. Gear up, flaps up, climbing turn toward the range. Viking 6, this is Runt. I'm overhead and ready for demonstration runs. Confirm range is cold and all personnel are clear of impact zones. Kovich's voice came back steady. Runt, Viking 6. Range is cold, personnel are clear, we're watching. Copy, stand by. Matilda rolled into a wide orbit above the range, scanning the terrain below. The target panels were clearly visible, white squares against brown earth. The Marines stood in a cluster 50 meters to the east, exactly where she'd told them to position themselves. She could see vehicles, equipment, the long shadows cast by the rising sun. Axe, Hammer, this is Runt. First pass will be north to south, 1,000 feet AGL, 15-degree dive angle. Call my approach. Axe responded immediately. Runt, Axe, copy your approach. We're holding at Angels 10. You're cleared hot. Matilda rolled into her attack run, the desert tilting as she banked hard. The target came into her HUD, crosshairs tracking smoothly, airspeed building, altitude decreasing in a controlled descent. The felt solid beneath her, responsive to every input. At 1,000 feet, she squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger roared to life with a sound unlike anything else in aviation. Not quite a buzz, not quite a roar, something deeper, more primal. The entire aircraft shuddered as 65 rounds per second tore down range. Depleted uranium penetrators moving at 3,400 feet per second. The target panels disintegrated. Dirt erupted in a perfectly straight line as the rounds walked across the impact zone. The run lasted 2 seconds. She released the trigger and pulled up, banking away as the engines climbed back to cruise power. "Run, Viking 6. Kovich's voice had changed, the casual tone replaced by something sharper. "That was, Jesus, we felt that from here." "That was 1,000 feet, Matilda replied. "Stand by for 500. She came around again, faster this time, lower. The desert rushed past underneath, close enough to see individual rocks and scrub brush. The target appeared and she fired again. The sound was louder this time, the impacts more violent. The rounds tore into the earth with explosive force, each penetrator carrying enough kinetic energy to punch through tank armor. The Marines on the ground were close enough now to feel the pressure wave, to hear the distinctive BRRRT that gave the gun its nickname. "Run, Viking 6, targets destroyed, that's accurate." Matilda didn't respond. She was already setting up the third pass, dropping to 200 feet, pushing her airspeed higher. This was where it got real. At this altitude, there was no margin for error. A momentary distraction, a slight miscalculation, and she'd plow into the desert at 300 knots. She steadied her breathing. The target appeared, closer than before, the Marines beside it shockingly near. She fired. The gun erupted and the world became noise and violence. Rounds screamed past the Marine position, so close that Chen would later say he could see the tracers carving the air above his head. The impacts threw dirt high enough to rain down on their helmets. The concussion was physical, a pressure that hit the chest and made it hard to breathe. Matilda held the trigger for exactly 2 seconds, then pulled up hard, the G-forces pressing her into the seat. The A-10 climbed away, engines roaring. She leveled off at 5,000 feet and keyed the radio. "Viking 6, run. That's the demonstration. Welcome to danger close." The radio was silent for a long moment. When Kovich finally responded, his voice was different. Respect had replaced skepticism. "Run, Viking 6, we understand, we definitely understand." Matilda smiled inside her helmet. They always understood after they saw the gun. She brought the A-10 around for landing, the demonstration complete. On the ground, the Marines stood in silence, staring at the destroyed targets and the torn earth. Chen looked at Kovich. "Sir, I take back everything I thought when she walked into that briefing room." Kovich nodded slowly. "Yeah, me too." The final briefing took place at 1400 hours in a secured room with no windows and armed guards at the door. Maps covered the walls. Computer screens displayed real-time intelligence feeds. Matilda sat at the head of the table, flanked by axe and hammer. Rivera stood near the back. Kovich and his Marines filled the remaining seats. A Navy commander named Briscoe, the mission commander, stood beside a large display screen. He was older than everyone else in the room, gray at the temples, with a kind of bearing that suggested he'd spent decades making hard decisions. "This is the final confirmation before we execute," Briscoe said. "Wheels up in 12 hours. Any questions or concerns need to be addressed now." He gestured to the screen, which showed satellite imagery of the compound. "Latest intel confirms the target is on site. SIGINT picked up communications traffic consistent with planning activities. Thermal imaging shows approximately 55 personnel. The AAA emplacements remain active." Kovich leaned forward. "Any change in QRF response time?" "Negative, still 11 minutes, but we've identified a secondary QRF location here." Briscoe pointed to a spot on the map that could respond in 20 minutes if activated. "Axe and Hammer will monitor both." Axe studied the secondary location. "What's the threat composition?" "Motorized infantry mostly. A few technicals with heavy weapons. Nothing that can threaten you at altitude, but definitely a problem for Runt if she's low. Matilda spoke without looking up from her notes. I'll handle the technicals if they show up. The gun goes through unarmored vehicles like tissue paper. Hammer raised a hand. What's the weather looking like? Clear skies, light winds from the southwest. Visibility unlimited. Moon set at 0100, so you'll have full darkness for the insertion. Temperature at ground level will be near freezing. Factor that into your equipment load. The Marines nodded. They'd already done the calculations. Briscoe continued. Rules of engagement remain weapons-free once contact is initiated. Positive identification required before engaging any target outside the compound perimeter. Collateral damage mitigation is a priority, but not at the expense of mission success or force protection. He looked directly at Matilda. That includes you, Lieutenant. If you're taking fire, you are authorized to neutralize the threat by any means necessary. Understood, Matilda said. What's the extraction timeline if we have to abort early? Rivera answered. I can be overhead in under 5 minutes from the time you call, but the further you are from the primary extraction point, the harder it gets. If you're still in the compound, I can't land. You'll have to move. Kovich traced the exfil route on the map. What if we're compromised before we reach the compound? Briscoe's expression hardened. Then you execute tactical discretion. Pull back if you can do so without being pursued. If you're being pursued, you hold position and call for air support. Runt turns their pursuit into a killing field, then you move to the extraction point. Ortega spoke up. What about prisoners, if we capture the target and others? Target is priority 1. Anyone else is secondary. If you can bring them, do it. If they slow you down, you leave them. Briscoe's tone made it clear this wasn't up for discussion. This is a direct action mission, not a prisoner snatch. We want the target alive, but we'll take him dead if that's how it plays out. Everyone else is expendable. Diaz shifted uncomfortably. What if we encounter non-combatants? There won't be any. Intel is certain. This compound is military only. Anyone inside is a legitimate target. Briscoe looked around the room. Any other questions about mission parameters? Silence. Good. Communications check at 0100. Insertion at 0300. Expected mission duration is 90 minutes from boots on ground to wheels up on extraction. By 0500 this will be over. He stepped away from the screen. Get crew rest. Hydrate. Check your gear. This is happening. The room began to empty. Matilda remained seated, reviewing her flight plan one more time. The numbers were solid. Fuel calculations, weapons load, timing, everything aligned. Kovich approached as she was gathering her materials. Can I ask you something? Matilda looked up. Sure. Why'd you stick with it? The Navy, aviation, all of this. You had to know it would be harder for you than for most people. Matilda considered the question. Nobody had asked her that in a long time. Because I was good at it. Because being told I couldn't do something made me want to do it more. And because once I got in the cockpit, none of the other stuff mattered. The aircraft doesn't care how tall I am. It only cares if I can fly it. Kovich nodded slowly. Fair enough. He started to turn away, then stopped. For the record, I'm glad you didn't quit. Matilda smiled slightly. Me too. Now go get some sleep. You're going to need it. 0230 came cold and dark. Matilda stood beside her A-10 on the Bagram flight line, completing her final walk-around by flashlight. The air smelled of jet fuel and distant smoke from burned pits on the far side of the base. Overhead, stars filled the sky in numbers impossible to see back home. Her crew chief, a senior airman named Kowalski, handed her the paperwork. She's ready, ma'am. 11 Mavericks, full rocket pods, and 1,600 rounds for the gun. You're heavy but within limits. Good. Matilda signed the forms and handed them back. How's the left engine? Perfect. They replaced the compressor blade that was showing wear. It'll run smooth. Matilda climbed the ladder and settled into the cockpit. The seat fit her perfectly. They'd modified it years ago to accommodate her height. She strapped in, the ritual of buckles and connections as familiar as breathing. Systems came online one by one. Displays glowed green. She ran through the checklist, Kowalski calling responses from the ground. Runt, this is Bagram Tower. You're cleared for engine start. She hit the ignition switches. The twin turbofans spooled up with their characteristic whine building to a steady roar. Vibrations ran through the airframe. Matilda watched the instruments, confirming temperatures and pressures were within parameters. Everything was green. Axe Hammer, this is Runt. Radio check. Runt Axe, loud and clear. We're 10 minutes from station. Runt Hammer, same, see you overhead. Matilda switched to the ground frequency. Viking 6, Runt, comms check. Kovach's voice came back, professional and steady. Runt Viking 6, good copy, we're loading now. Rivera's spinning up. Good hunting, Viking, I'll be waiting. She switched back to tower frequency. Bagram Tower, Runt, ready for taxi. Runt Bagram Tower, taxi to runway 20. Winds are light and variable. You're cleared for takeoff on roll. The A-10 moved forward, Matilda steering with slight pressure on the rudder pedals. The aircraft felt heavy with the full weapons load, but it always did. She taxied past rows of parked helicopters and transports, past hardened shelters and defensive positions. The runway stretched ahead, marked by lights that disappeared into darkness. She pulled onto the center line and stopped, running through final checks. Tower called. Runt, you're cleared for takeoff. Good luck. Runt is rolling. She advanced the throttles to full military power. The engines roared and they accelerated down the runway, faster and faster, the lights blurring past, rotation speed. She pulled back on the stick and the nose lifted, the wheels leaving the pavement. The aircraft climbed into the darkness, Bagram falling away below. Gear up, flaps up, climbing turn toward the southeast. Matilda leveled off at 20,000 feet and checked her navigation. The holding point was 90 minutes away, across mountains and desert that looked black and formless in the darkness below. Her radar showed Axe and Hammer already on station, orbiting the target area. Axe, Runt, I'm airborne and en route. ETA to holding point is 0400. Copy, Runt, we've got eyes on the compound. No activity yet, it's quiet down there. Matilda settled into the flight, her hands steady on the controls. The cockpit was dark except for instrument glow. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly overhead. This was the part she loved most, the solitude and focus of a night flight. Just her and the aircraft and the mission ahead. She thought about the Marines loading into Rivera's Seahawk right now, checking their weapons and gear, their faces hard and focused. She thought about Kovach briefing his team one last time. She thought about the compound below, the people inside who had no idea what was coming for them. 90 minutes passed in silence. Matilda reached the holding point and entered a lazy orbit, her eyes scanning the instruments and the darkness below. Far ahead, almost invisible, she could see the dim glow of settlements on the horizon. Runt Axe, we've got Rivera inbound. 20 minutes to insertion. Copy. Matilda checked her weapon systems. Everything armed and ready. She adjusted her grip on the stick, flexing her fingers. 20 minutes until this became real. Rivera's voice came over the radio. All stations, this is Spade 1. We're 15 minutes out. Weather is clear. Viking 6 confirms ready. Kovach's voice followed. Runt, Viking 6, we're going to need you sharp down there. Matilda keyed her mic. Viking, I've been sharp since before you were born. Just point me at what needs dying. The radio crackled with brief laughter, quickly suppressed. 15 minutes became 10, then 5. Matilda descended to 18,000 feet. Still outside the air defense envelope, but ready to drop lower the moment the Marines hit the ground. Her radar showed Rivera approaching from the north, low and fast, using the terrain to mask his approach. All stations, this is Spade 1. 2 minutes to insertion, going dark. Rivera's helicopter disappeared from her radar as he descended into the valleys below. Matilda switched to her thermal imaging, scanning the terrain ahead. The compound appeared as a cluster of heat signatures, buildings glowing against the cold desert. She counted the structures, the defensive positions, the patterns of movement. 55 hostiles, just like Intel said, maybe more. Runt, Viking 6, we're 30 seconds out. Matilda dropped to 15,000 feet, still descending, her eyes locked on the thermal display. The compound's AAA positions were clearly visible now, warm barrels pointing skyward. She marked each one mentally, planning her gun runs. Spade 1 is landing. Ramps down. 15 seconds. The thermal imaging showed Rivera's helicopter touching down, the Marines pouring out, spreading into tactical formation. Then the helicopter lifted off again, climbing hard and fast, getting clear of the landing zone. Viking 6 is boots on ground, Spade 1 is clear, beginning movement to line of departure. Matilda continued descending, 12,000 feet, 10,000, the air grew thicker, warmer, she armed her weapon systems, the missile indicators glowing red on her HUD. Runt, Viking 6, we're at the LD, 2 minutes to contact. Copy, Viking, I'm coming down, call contact when you initiate. 1,000 feet now, 6,000. The terrain rushed up to meet her, mountains and valleys taking shape in the darkness. She could see the compound clearly now, even without thermals. Lights burned in some of the buildings. Vehicles were parked in a courtyard. People moved between structures unaware. Matilda's breathing steadied. Her heart rate slowed. This was the moment. Everything before was preparation. Everything after would be execution. Right now, balanced between the two, she existed in perfect calm. Runt, Viking 6, we're crossing the LD. Contact in 30 seconds. Runt is dropping to attack altitude. Stand by. 4,000 feet. 2,000. The altimeter unwound rapidly as she dove toward the desert floor. The mountains rose on either side, close enough to touch. She leveled off at 500 feet and pushed the throttles forward, accelerating toward the compound. The AAA positions filled her HUD. Viking 6, contact, taking fire from the compound. Automatic weapons fire lit up the darkness ahead. Tracers arced across the desert, searching for the Marines. Matilda saw the muzzle flashes, marked the positions, and rolled into her first attack run. The crosshairs settled on the northern AAA emplacement. Matilda squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared to life, the sound rolling across the desert like thunder. The emplacement exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. She held the trigger for exactly 2 seconds, walking the rounds across the position until nothing remained but burning wreckage. Runt, Viking 6. Good hits, good hits. Northern gun is down. She pulled up and banked hard, coming around for the second emplacement. Tracers were streaming toward her now, bright lines in the darkness. Something impacted her left wing with a metallic bang. The aircraft shuddered but kept flying. She ignored it. The second emplacement appeared in her HUD. She fired. More thunder, more destruction. The position disintegrated under the concentrated firepower. 2 seconds of the GAU-8 was enough to destroy anything short of a main battle tank. Second gun is down. Third gun is tracking you. Runt, break right. Matilda rolled the A-10 into a hard right turn, pulling GS that made her vision narrow at the edges. The third emplacement's tracers chased her across the sky, falling behind as she maneuvered. She completed the turn and came back at them from a different angle. The crosshairs found the target. She fired. The gun shook the aircraft, the recoil powerful enough to slow her airspeed. Rounds tore into the third emplacement and it erupted in flames. Secondary explosions followed as ammunition cooked off. All guns down. Viking 6 is moving to the compound. Matilda climbed to 1,000 feet and orbited, watching as the Marines advanced. Thermal imaging showed them moving in 2 teams, covering each other, professional and fast. Muzzle flashes erupted from the compound buildings as defenders opened fire. Runt, Viking 6. We need fire on the main building, western side. Enemy personnel in the windows. Matilda rolled into a dive, lining up on the western wall. She could see the muzzle flashes clearly now, defenders firing from upper-story windows. She selected rockets and fired. 6 rockets streaked away from her wing pods, trailing fire. They impacted along the western wall in a rippling explosion that collapsed part of the structure. The muzzle flashes stopped. Good hits, Runt. Building is suppressed. We're moving in. She climbed again, circling, her eyes scanning for new threats. The compound was chaos now. Defenders running between buildings, some trying to reach vehicles, others setting up new fighting positions. Runt, Viking 6. We've got enemy personnel trying to flank us from the eastern building. Need immediate suppression. Matilda banked hard and dove again. The eastern building appeared in her thermals, heat signatures clustered near the entrance. She fired the gun. The rounds tore through the building's thin walls like paper. Bodies fell. The survivors scattered. Eastern building is clear. We're entering the main structure now. Minutes passed. Matilda continued orbiting, watching, waiting. The sky around her was full of tracers now as defenders fired wildly upward, hopping to hit her. None came close. Below, the Marines moved through the compound systematically, clearing rooms, neutralizing resistance. Her radio crackled. "Runt Viking 6, we have the target. I say again, we have the target. He's secure. We're moving to extract." "Copy, Viking. Good work. Spade 1, did you copy?" Rivera's voice came back. "Spade 1 copies. I'm inbound to the primary extraction point." 2 minutes out. Matilda checked her fuel, plenty remaining. She switched her attention to the compound's perimeter, watching for the QRF that Intel had warned about. "All stations, this is Axe. We've got vehicles moving from the west, looks like the QRF. They're 20 minutes out but moving fast." "Runt copies. I'll keep them off Viking until Spade 1 is clear." She banked toward the west, scanning for the approaching vehicles. Her radar picked them up, 6 vehicles running hard across the desert. She armed 2 Mavericks and waited. The Marines emerged from the compound, moving quickly toward the extraction point. Matilda could see them on thermal, Kovich in the lead, his team carrying the target between them. Behind them, survivors in the compound were trying to regroup. She put a gun run through the compound courtyard, scattering them, buying the Marines more time. Spade 1 is landing at primary extraction point. Rivera's helicopter appeared on her thermals, touching down in a swirl of rotor wash. The Marines reached it seconds later, loading quickly. Viking 6 is aboard, Spade 1 is lifting. The helicopter climbed hard, turning north, accelerating. Matilda followed, high above, watching as the compound fell away behind them. The QRF vehicles arrived too late, their headlights illuminating nothing but empty desert and burning buildings. "All stations, this is Viking 6. Mission complete. Target secure. No casualties. Thanks for the cover, Runt." Matilda allowed herself a slight smile. "Viking, it's what I do. Nice work down there." Axe's voice came over the radio. "Runt, this is Axe. That was some impressive flying. We had a front row seat. You're as good as advertised." "Appreciated, Axe. Let's all go home." The flight back to Bagram took 90 minutes, the reverse of her inbound journey. The darkness was beginning to fade, the sky turning gray at the edges. By the time Matilda brought her onto final approach, the sun was rising over the mountains. She touched down smoothly, the wheels chirping on the runway. As she taxied toward the flight line, she could see a small crowd gathered near the hangars, unusual for this hour. She parked and shut down the engines, the turbines winding down with a dying whine. When she climbed out of the cockpit, Kowalski was waiting at the base of the ladder. "How'd she do, ma'am?" "Perfect. Not a single hiccup." Matilda pulled off her helmet, her hair matted with sweat despite the cold. She walked around the aircraft, inspecting the damage. There were multiple bullet holes in the left wing, and a section of the tail showed scorching from what looked like a near miss from an RPG, but nothing critical. Nothing that would have stopped her from completing the mission. She ran her hand over the patched holes, feeling the torn metal. This was what the A-10 was built for, to take punishment and keep flying. Kovich approached across the tarmac, his team behind him. They were still in their combat gear, dirt-streaked and exhausted, but grinning. "Lieutenant Voss." Kovich came to attention and saluted. Matilda returned it, surprised. Officers in a combat zone rarely bothered with formalities. "Staff Sergeant, congratulations on a successful mission." Kovich lowered his salute, but his expression remained serious. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology, we all do." Matilda tilted her head slightly. "For what?" "For every thought we had when you walked into that briefing room, for every doubt, for thinking your size meant anything about your capability." He gestured to the damaged A-10 behind her. "You put yourself in harm's way to keep us alive. You flew through fire that would have scared most pilots away, and you didn't hesitate, not once." The other Marines nodded, their expressions echoing Kovich's words. Chen stepped forward. "You saved our lives tonight, ma'am, multiple times. We won't forget that." Matilda felt something tighten in her chest. She'd been doing this job for years, flying missions like this more times than she could count. But acknowledgement from the people on the ground, the ones she'd covered, the ones she'd protected, that was rare. Most of the time they never saw her, never knew her name, never connected the voice on the radio with a person. "You did the hard part," she said finally. "I just made sure nobody shot you while you were doing it." Kovich shook his head. "Don't diminish what you did. We all saw how close you came. Those tracers were tracking you the whole time. You could have stayed higher, stayed safer, but you didn't. You came down to our level because that's what we needed." Ortega spoke up from the back of the group. The call sign makes sense now. Runt, not because you're small, because you've got the heart of something 10 times your size. Matilda smiled slightly. That's one interpretation. Diaz looked at the damaged aircraft. Can I ask you something, ma'am? Sure. When they were shooting at you, were you scared? Matilda considered lying, giving them the answer they probably expected. But these were combat Marines. They knew fear. They'd faced it tonight just like she had. Terrified, she said honestly. Every single time someone fires at me, I'm terrified. The A-10 is tough but not invincible. One lucky hit in the wrong place and I'm walking home, or not walking at all. She paused. But fear is just information. It tells you the situation is dangerous. It doesn't tell you what to do about it. Training does that. Experience does that. You do your job despite the fear, not because it isn't there. The Marines were silent, processing her words. Kovich extended his hand. Thank you, Lieutenant, for everything. Matilda shook it. His grip was firm, respectful. Get some rest, Staff Sergeant. You've earned it. The Marines dispersed slowly, heading toward their barracks. Matilda remained beside her aircraft, running her hand along the fuselage one more time. Kowalski approached with a tablet, already logging the damage for the maintenance crews. They're going to want to patch her up before your next flight. How long? 48 hours, maybe less. The holes are easy. The tail scoring is cosmetic. Matilda nodded. Good, keep me updated. She started walking toward the operations building, exhaustion finally beginning to set in. The mission was complete. The target was in custody. The Marines were safe. Her aircraft was damaged but flyable. By any measure, it was a success. But she knew from experience that successful missions faded from memory quickly. People moved on to the next crisis, the next target, the next operation. What mattered was the pattern, the accumulation of successful missions over time. That's what built a reputation. That's what made people trust you when it counted. Inside the operations building, she filed her after-action report, answered questions from the intelligence officers who wanted every detail about what she'd observed, and finally made her way to her quarters. She stripped off her flight suit, took a shower that washed away the sweat and tension, and collapsed onto her bunk. Sleep came quickly, deep and dreamless. When she woke, it was late afternoon. She dressed in her service uniform and headed to the dining facility, suddenly aware she hadn't eaten in 16 hours. The DFAC was crowded, filled with soldiers and airmen and contractors. She grabbed a tray and moved through the line, selecting food without really paying attention. She found an empty table in the corner and sat down, grateful for the relative quiet. She was halfway through her meal when someone approached. A Navy captain, older, with silver eagles on his collar. Matilda started to stand, but he waved her back down. Lieutenant Voss, I'm Captain Hendricks, Air Operations Officer. Mind if I sit? Of course, sir. Hendricks sat across from her, setting down his coffee. I wanted to tell you personally that was excellent work last night. I reviewed your gun camera footage and read the ground team's debrief. They couldn't say enough good things about your performance. Thank you, sir. The Marines made it easy. They gave me good target information and trusted me to execute. Humility is admirable, but don't sell yourself short. You flew a textbook close air support mission under heavy fire. Those gun runs at 500 feet were aggressive by any standard. Most pilots would have stayed higher. Matilda sipped her water. The A-10 is designed to get low. It's where the aircraft excels. Staying higher would have been safer for me but more dangerous for the Marines. Hendricks nodded slowly. That's the right answer, but it's also the hard answer. Not everyone makes that choice. He paused. I'm putting you in for a medal, probably a Distinguished Flying Cross. The ground commander is submitting paperwork on his end recommending you for recognition. Between the two, you should get something. Matilda felt uncomfortable with the praise. Sir, I was just doing my job. Yes, and your job involves volunteering to fly into enemy fire so others can complete their mission. That deserves recognition. Hendricks stood up. Keep up the good work, Lieutenant. The Air Force needs more pilots like you. He left before she could respond. Matilda finished her meal in silence, thinking about medals and recognition. She'd received commendations before, her medals mostly, the standard award for flying combat missions. But a Distinguished Flying Cross was different. That was for heroism, for extraordinary achievement in aerial flight. She wasn't sure she'd done anything heroic. She'd done what the mission required, what her training prepared her for. But maybe that was the point. Maybe heroism wasn't about seeking glory. Maybe it was about doing the hard thing when nobody was watching, making the dangerous choice because it was the right choice, regardless of the cost. Over the following weeks, word of the mission spread through Bagram. People who'd never heard of Matilda Voss suddenly knew her name. Marines from other units sought her out to thank her, even though she hadn't flown their missions. Pilots asked her about techniques, about how she managed gun runs that close to friendlies. She answered their questions patiently, sharing what she'd learned, trying to demystify the process. Flying close air support wasn't magic. It was precision, repetition, and an absolute refusal to accept failure. One evening, she was walking across the flight line when she encountered Kovich again. He was standing near her A-10, which was back from maintenance and looked pristine despite the patches covering the bullet holes. "Evening, Staff Sergeant," she said. "Evening, ma'am. Just wanted to see the bird that saved our asses. She's beautiful." Matilda smiled. "She's ugly as hell, but she works." Kovich ran his hand along the nose, tracing the runt nose art. "Can I ask where you're from? Originally, I mean." "Wyoming. Small town called Sheridan, population 3,000. You could walk from one end to the other in 15 minutes. Rural. Very. My dad was a rancher. My mom taught elementary school. I grew up riding horses and fixing fences. Nobody thought I'd end up in the Navy flying attack aircraft." Kovich laughed. "I bet. How'd it happen?" "I saw a documentary about naval aviation when I was 12. They showed footage of an F-14 launching from a carrier, and I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. Decided right then that's what I wanted to do." "And your parents supported that?" Matilda hesitated. "My dad thought I was crazy. He told me the Navy didn't take girls my size, that I should focus on something realistic. My mom was more encouraging, but even she thought it was a long shot." She looked at the aircraft. "Turns out they were both right. It was a long shot, but I made it anyway." Kovich nodded slowly. "Your dad must be proud now." "He died before I got my wings. Heart attack during my junior year at Annapolis. He never saw me fly." The words came out flat, emotionless, but they carried weight. Kovich's expression softened. "I'm sorry. Me too, but I think about him every time I strap in. Wonder what he'd say if he could see me now, if he'd still think I was crazy." "I think he'd be proud. Anyone would be." Matilda changed the subject. "How's your team?" "Good. Resting up for the next op. We ship out again in 3 days. Different target, same general area." "You need air support." "We always need air support, but I don't know if they'll assign you. Tasking comes down from higher. If they do, you've got my number. Call me if you need precision fires." Kovich extended his hand. She shook it. "I will, and Lieutenant, for what it's worth, you changed how my Marines think about pilots. They used to see you guys as taxi services with bombs. Now they understand it's more than that." "Good, because it is." Kovich walked away, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Matilda remained beside her aircraft for a while longer, watching the sky fade from blue to purple to black. Stars emerged one by one, the same stars she'd grown up seeing over Wyoming ranches. She thought about her father, about his skepticism and his fear that she was chasing something impossible. She thought about all the people who doubted her, who told her she was too small, too weak, not enough. And she thought about the Marines whose lives she'd saved, who saw her now not as a curiosity but as someone they could trust. That was the legacy she wanted, not medals or commendations or recognition from people who'd never flown combat. Just the simple knowledge that when someone called for help, she'd be there. That when rounds were flying and people were dying, she'd put her aircraft between them and the enemy, no matter the cost. That was enough. 3 days later, Kovich's team did ship out. Matilda wasn't assigned to their operation. Instead, she flew missions for other units, other teams, other crises that seemed to multiply faster than they could be resolved. Some missions were quiet, long hours of orbiting overhead while ground teams maneuvered. Others were violent, sudden eruptions of gunfire and explosions that required immediate response. She flew them all with the same intensity, the same focus. Each mission was someone's life or death moment, and she treated it that way. 6 weeks after the compound raid, Captain Hendricks called her to his office. She reported in service dress blues, wondering what this was about. Hendricks gestured to a chair. "Sit, Lieutenant, this won't take long," she sat. Hendricks pulled out a folder and opened it. "Your Distinguished Flying Cross was approved. The ceremony is scheduled for next week. Admiral Blackwood will be presenting it. Congratulations." Matilda absorbed the news quietly. "Thank you, sir. There's more. The Marine Corps submitted a formal letter of commendation. It's being entered into your permanent record. They specifically cited your, quote, extraordinary courage under fire and unwavering commitment to the Marines you were supporting." He looked up from the folder. "That's high praise coming from Marines. They don't hand out compliments lightly." "I'm honored, sir." Hendricks closed the folder. "You should be. But I'm going to be honest with you, Lieutenant. This kind of recognition comes with expectations. People are going to watch you more closely now. They're going to expect excellence every time. The pressure will increase." Matilda met his eyes. "Sir, I've been dealing with pressure since I was 18 years old and showed up at Annapolis weighing 98 pounds. This isn't new." "Fair point." Hendricks smiled slightly. "Just don't let it change how you fly. Stay focused on the mission. The rest is noise." "Understood, sir." The ceremony took place on a clear morning, the kind of weather that made Afghanistan almost beautiful. The assembled crowd included pilots, Marines, Navy personnel, and senior leadership. Matilda stood at attention while Admiral Blackwood read the citation, his voice carrying across the flight line. When he pinned the medal to her uniform, she felt the weight of it, both physical and symbolic. This was more than medal and ribbon. It was validation. Proof that she belonged here, that she'd earned her place through skill and courage, not luck or connections. Afterward, people congratulated her. Axe and Hammer were there, grinning. Rivera shook her hand. Kovich and his Marines had returned from their latest operation and stood in the back, clapping. But the person Matilda most wanted to talk to wasn't there. Her father was 10 years gone, buried in a cemetery in Wyoming she hadn't visited since his funeral. She wondered what he'd think of this moment, if he'd finally accept that his daughter had done something impossible. Later, back in her quarters, she looked at the medal in its case. The bronze star gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She thought about all the missions that had led to this, all the close calls and near misses, all the times she'd pushed her aircraft and herself to the edge of capability. And she thought about the missions still to come because the war wasn't over. It wouldn't be over for a long time. People would keep calling for help and she'd keep answering. That's what the job required. That's what she'd signed up for. She closed the medal case and put it away. Tomorrow there would be another briefing, another mission, another chance to prove that size and strength didn't matter as much as skill and determination. She'd keep flying until they told her to stop, and maybe even then she'd find a way to keep going. Because this was who she was. Not a girl from Wyoming who defied the odds. Not a pilot with a medal. Just runt, call sign, and reputation, putting 30mm rounds exactly where they were needed, every single time. The story could have ended there, with Matilda Voss decorated and respected, her place in Navy aviation secured. But wars don't end cleanly, and neither do the stories of the people who fight them. 3 months after receiving the Distinguished Flying Cross, Matilda found herself standing in the same briefing room where she'd first met Kovich's team. This time the mission was different. The stakes were higher. Intelligence had tracked a high-value target moving through the mountains near the Pakistan border. Not just any target, this was someone whose capture would disrupt enemy operations for months, maybe years. The operation required a larger force, 20 Marines, 2 Seahawk helicopters, 4 F-18 Super Hornets, and Matilda in her A-10. The terrain was worse than before, steep mountains with narrow valleys where aircraft couldn't maneuver easily. The enemy force was larger, better armed, more organized. Matilda studied the mission brief with growing concern. The extraction point was barely large enough for 1 helicopter, let alone 2. The air defense threat was significant, not just small arms and RPGs, but actual surface-to-air missiles. The QRF response time was shorter, under 8 minutes, and they had attack helicopters. This wasn't a raid. This was a sustained battle waiting to happen. The mission commander this time was a Marine colonel named Watkins, a career infantry officer with 3 combat deployments and a reputation for aggressive tactics. He stood at the front of the room, pointer in hand, outlining the plan. Insertion at 0200, 2 teams, 10 Marines each. Team 1 secures the target compound. Team 2 provides security and covers the exfil route. He tapped the map. Lieutenant Voss will provide close air support from H-hour until extraction is complete. The Hornets will handle air superiority and any QRF that shows up. Matilda raised her hand. Sir, the valley where the compound is located is only a mile wide. I'll have limited maneuvering room. If I take fire, I won't be able to evade easily. Watkins nodded. Acknowledged. That's why we're sending the Hornets in first to suppress air defenses. By the time you're overhead, the major threats should be neutralized. And if they're not, then you do what you've been doing for 4 years, fly through it and complete the mission. Matilda didn't argue further, but she exchanged glances with the Hornet pilots. They looked as concerned as she felt. After the briefing, Kovich approached her. He was one of the team leaders on this mission. You looked worried in there. I am worried. This mission profile has a lot of ways to go wrong. You think we should abort? Matilda shook her head. Not my call, but if I was making it, I'd want more air assets and a better extraction plan. 2 helicopters in a narrow valley with limited landing zones is asking for trouble. Kovich considered this. Can I tell you something off the record? Sure. Watkins has been pushing for this mission for weeks. Intel says the target is only going to be at this location for another 48 hours. If we don't hit him now, we lose him. So this is a now or never situation. Exactly. Which means the pressure is on everyone to make it work, regardless of the risks. Matilda understood. Mission pressure led to corner cutting, to accepting risks that would normally be unacceptable. She'd seen it before. All right, she said. Then we make it work, but I need you to promise me something. What? If things go sideways, you trust my judgment on when to pull back. I won't leave you hanging, but I also won't fly into a situation where I can't help you. Fair. Kovich extended his hand. Fair. They shook on it. 24 hours later, Matilda was back in her cockpit, running through pre-flight checks under a moonless sky. The mission had been moved up by 6 hours due to new intelligence suggesting the target might leave early. Everything felt rushed, compressed, inadequate. She pushed the concerns aside and focused on the checklist. Weapons systems green, fuel tanks full, communications checked and rechecked. Her A-10 was as ready as it could be. At 0130, she launched from Bagram and climbed into the darkness. The flight to the target area took longer this time because of the mountainous terrain. She had to fly around peaks rather than over them to stay off enemy radar. The Hornets were already on station when she arrived, orbiting at high altitude. The Seahawks were inbound, 20 minutes from insertion. Runt, this is Blade 1. The lead Hornet pilot's call sign was Stone. We've completed our sweep. SAM sites are active, but we've marked their locations. They're tracking us but haven't fired yet. Copy, Blade 1. Any signs they've detected the ground package? Negative. They're focused on us. That's by design. Matilda climbed to 15,000 feet and began her orbit. Below, the valley stretched out like a black scar between mountains. A few scattered lights marked villages, but the target compound was dark. She switched to thermal imaging. The compound blazed white-hot against the cold mountainside. Multiple heat signatures inside, moving between buildings. Vehicles in the courtyard. Armed guards on the perimeter. This wasn't a lightly defended position. This was a fortress. All stations, this is Spade 1. We're 5 minutes from insertion. Matilda descended to 10,000 feet, watching the Seahawks approach on her radar. They came in fast and low, using the terrain to mask their approach. 4 minutes. 3. Spade 1 and Spade 2 are landing. The helicopters touched down simultaneously at separate landing zones north of the compound. Marines poured out, 20 figures disappearing into the darkness. The Seahawks lifted off immediately and retreated to a holding position 10 miles north. Now the Marines were alone on the ground, moving toward the compound through terrain that offered minimal cover. Matilda descended further to 8,000 feet, then 6. She could see the Marines now on thermal, 2 distinct groups moving in coordinated bounds. Team 1, led by Kovich, advancing directly on the compound. Team 2 swinging wide to the east to cut off escape routes. 5 minutes passed in tense silence. The Marines reached their assault positions without being detected. Kovach's voice came over the radio, calm and professional. "All stations, this is Viking 6. We are set. Initiating assault on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." The silence shattered. Explosions bloomed in the compound as the Marines breached the outer walls with demo charges. Gunfire erupted immediately, tracers streaking in all directions. The defenders had been more alert than intel suggested. "Runt, Viking 6. We're taking heavy fire from the main building. Need immediate suppression." Matilda rolled into a dive, dropping from 6,000 feet to attack altitude in seconds. The compound rushed up to meet her, bright with muzzle flashes and explosions. She lined up on the main building and fired the gun. Thunder rolled across the valley. The building's second story disintegrated under the concentrated fire. But even as she pulled up, she saw more defenders emerging from other structures, taking positions, returning fire with organized discipline. This wasn't a surprised enemy. This was a prepared defense. "Viking 6, West Building is putting accurate fire on our position. We need it gone." She came around again, faster this time, lower. The West Building appeared in her HUD. She fired rockets. 6 missiles streaked away and the building erupted in flames. Good hits, building is down." But now the valley was alive with anti-aircraft fire. Tracers filled the air around her, so thick it looked like rain. Something impacted her right wing with a sound like a hammer on steel. Warning lights flashed in the cockpit, hydraulic pressure dropping in the right system. "Runt has taken fire. Minor damage, still mission capable." She climbed to 1,000 feet, assessing. The damage wasn't critical yet, but if she took more hits in the same system, things could get complicated. Below, the Marines were fighting their way into the compound. The radio was chaos now, multiple voices calling targets, reporting casualties, coordinating movements. Team 2 had engaged a QRF coming from the east earlier than expected. The Hornets dove to intercept, their missiles streaking down to destroy the approaching vehicles. "Viking 6 to all stations. We have the target. I say again, we have the target. Beginning exfil now." Too early. They were supposed to have 15 minutes to reach the extraction point. Something had gone wrong. Matilda didn't ask questions. She just kept flying, watching as the Marines retreated from the compound under heavy fire. "Runt, Viking 6. We're taking casualties. Need continuous cover on our route to extraction." "Copy, Viking. I'm on it." She dropped back to 500 feet and began flying racetrack patterns over the Marine route, firing the gun at any enemy fighters who tried to follow. The GAU-8 chewed through her ammunition. 1,600 rounds sounds like a lot until you're firing 65 per second. She was down to 800 rounds, 600, 400. Spade 1 and Spade 2 inbound to extraction point, ETA 2 minutes. The Marines were still 300 meters from the extraction point, moving through open ground with minimal cover. Enemy fighters were pursuing, firing from elevated positions. Matilda put gun runs between the Marines and their pursuers, the rounds impacting so close that Kovach's team could feel the heat. "Runt, your danger close. Stay down, Viking." She made another pass, expending the last of her cannon ammunition. The gun went silent, the familiar weight of recoil disappearing. She was Winchester on the gun. Only missiles and rockets remained. The Seahawks appeared, racing toward the extraction point at maximum speed. But as they flared to land, one of them staggered in midair. Smoke poured from its engine. "Spade 2 is hit. I'm losing power." The damaged Seahawk managed to touch down but immediately began smoking worse. Marines ran toward both helicopters. Kovach's team loaded onto Spade 1. The other team headed for Spade 2. "Spade 2, can you fly?" Rivera's voice was tight. "Negative. Engine is failing. I need immediate evac for my crew." This was the nightmare scenario. 1 helicopter down, 20 Marines and the aircrew needing extraction, enemy forces closing in. Matilda made a decision. "All stations, this is Runt. I'm putting Mavericks into the compound to buy us time. Spade 1, can you take everyone?" "Negative," Rivera responded. "We're at max capacity now. Can't take Spade 2's crew without leaving Marines behind." "Then hold position. I'll keep them off you. She armed her Mavericks and began systematically destroying targets around the compound. Each missile obliterated a vehicle or structure, creating a wall of fire and debris. But missiles ran out. She was down to her last two. The enemy was still coming. Viking 6 to Spade 1. Load everyone you can. Leave the rest of us. We'll dig in. Negative, Matilda's voice cut across the radio. Nobody gets left. Spade 1, you're taking the target and half the force. Launch now. Viking, you hold the landing zone with the rest until I can get another bird in. Runt, there's no other bird. There will be. She switched to the emergency frequency and called Bagram. Any station, Bagram, this is Runt. I have Marines in contact requiring immediate CASEVAC. One helicopter down. Need backup extraction now. A new voice came on the line. Runt, this is Bagram Actual. Closest asset is a CH-47 Chinook 40 minutes out. Can you hold that long? Matilda looked at her fuel gauge. She had maybe 20 minutes of flying time left at this altitude. After that, she'd have to climb to reach the tanker or head home. Neither option was acceptable. Affirmative, Bagram will hold. Send the Chinook now. She switched back to tactical frequency. Viking, you've got 40 minutes. Spade 1 is launching with the target and 10 Marines. You hold with 10 Marines and Spade 2's crew. I'll cover you. Runt, you don't have the ordnance. I've got 2 Mavericks and an aircraft full of fuel. That's enough. Spade 1 lifted off, overloaded and struggling for altitude. It cleared the valley and disappeared into the night. On the ground, Kovich and his remaining Marines formed a defensive perimeter around the downed Seahawk. The enemy was closing from 3 directions. Matilda fired her last 2 Mavericks, destroying the closest groups of enemy fighters. Then she did something she'd never done before. She began making gun runs without ammunition, flying low and fast over enemy positions. The psychological effect was immediate. Fighters scattered and dove for cover, not knowing her gun was empty. She repeated the passes, each one bringing her lower closer until she was at 200 feet, skimming the valley floor at 300 knots. Warning lights were flashing now. Low fuel, hydraulic pressure critical, engine temperature climbing. She ignored all of it. Blade 1, this is Runt. I need you to make noise. Sonic booms, afterburner passes, anything that makes these guys think twice about advancing. Copy, Runt. We're on it. The Hornets dove, their afterburners lighting up the sky. They broke the sound barrier directly over the compound, the twin sonic booms rattling the valley. Then they came back at low altitude, engines screaming, creating a wall of sound and fury. It worked. The enemy advance slowed, then stopped. Fighters began retreating toward the compound, seeking cover from the aircraft that seemed intent on tearing the valley apart. Matilda checked her fuel. 5 minutes until she had to leave or risk flaming out. The Chinook wasn't going to make it in time. She made another decision. Viking 6, this is Runt. I'm landing. Silence on the radio. Then, say again, Runt. I'm landing. The A-10 has landing gear and I've got space. I can land on that road north of your position. Runt, that's insane. Maybe, but it's also the only way everyone gets out. Start moving toward the road. I'll be on the ground in 2 minutes. She didn't wait for approval. She dropped her landing gear and slowed the A-10, configuring for landing. The road below was barely wide enough for the aircraft's wingspan, rough and unpaved, but it would work. It had to work. At 150 knots, she crossed over the road, lined up, and began her descent. The A-10 settled onto the rough surface with a bone-jarring impact that threw her against the straps. The aircraft bounced once, settled again, and rolled to a stop. She kept the engines running. Viking, I'm on the ground. Load up. You've got 2 minutes before I run out of fuel. Kovich and his Marines sprinted toward the aircraft. The A-10's cockpit was single-seat, but there was space behind the seat and in the belly beneath the fuselage where Marines could squeeze in. They climbed on the wings into the engine nacelles, anywhere they could find purchase. Rivera and his crew chief climbed onto the nose. It was ridiculous, dangerous, completely against every regulation and procedure. The A-10 wasn't designed to carry passengers. Matilda didn't care. Everyone on. Viking 6 is on. Go, go, go. She advanced the throttles. The overloaded A-10 began rolling down the road, picking up speed slowly, too slowly. They were heavy, dangerously heavy. The road was running out. Mountains loomed ahead. Come on, Matilda whispered to the aircraft. Come on, baby, you can do this. 50 knots, 60, 70. The end of the road was seconds away. She pulled back on the stick. The A-10 staggered into the air, wallowing, barely flying. The nose wanted to drop. She fought it, using every ounce of strength to keep the aircraft from stalling. The mountains filled her windscreen. She banked hard, trading altitude for turn radius, threading between peaks with meters to spare. The A-10 responded sluggishly, the extra weight and drag making every input feel like moving through mud. But they were airborne. They were clear. All stations, this is Runt, were clear of the valley. All personnel recovered. The radio exploded with voices, Bagram calling for confirmation, the Hornets asking if she needed assistance, someone else shouting about regulations and procedures. Matilda ignored them all. She focused on flying, on coaxing her dying, overloaded aircraft back toward Bagram. One engine was running hot. Hydraulics were failing. Fuel was almost gone. And there were 10 Marines clinging to the outside of her aircraft in sub-zero wind at 8,000 feet. She flew as gently as possible, avoiding sharp maneuvers, nursing the aircraft through the air like it was made of glass. 30 minutes later, she called Bagram Tower. Bagram Tower, this is Runt. I'm inbound for emergency landing. I have personnel on the exterior of the aircraft. I'll need medical and rescue on the runway. There was a pause. Then, Runt, say again. Did you say personnel on the exterior? Affirmative. 10 Marines and 2 Navy aircrew. They're holding on to whatever they can. I need the runway cleared and emergency services standing by. Another pause, longer this time. Runt, you're cleared for straighten approach to runway 20. All traffic is holding. Emergency services are moving into position. Matilda began her descent, shallow and controlled. Every bump made her wince, imagining the people clinging to her aircraft in the wind. She flew the smoothest approach of her life, carrying extra airspeed to keep the ride stable. The runway appeared, lined with emergency vehicles. She crossed the threshold at 90 knots, bleeding off speed gradually, letting the aircraft settle onto the runway with the gentlest touchdown she'd ever managed. The wheels chirped. The A-10 rolled out. She applied the brakes carefully, bringing the aircraft to a stop halfway down the runway. Only then did she shut down the engines. Silence. She sat in the cockpit, hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fatting. Outside, she could hear voices, people moving. She unstrapped and climbed out of the cockpit. Marines were sliding off the wings, helped down by emergency crews. Rivera and his crew chief climbed off the nose, their faces red and frozen from the wind. Medics rushed forward with blankets and medical kits. Kovich stood beside the aircraft, looking up at Matilda as she descended the ladder. His face was streaked with dirt and exhaustion. That, he said slowly, was the craziest thing I've ever seen anyone do. Matilda's legs felt weak. She steadied herself against the ladder. Did everyone make it? Everyone. Not a single person lost. Because of you. The reality of what she'd done was beginning to sink in. She'd landed an A-10 on a dirt road under enemy fire. She'd taken off overloaded with passengers clinging to the exterior. She'd flown for 30 minutes with critically low fuel and failing systems. Any one of those things could have killed everyone involved. I need to sit down, she said quietly. Kovich caught her arm as her legs gave out. Medic, we need a medic over here. The world swam. Matilda tried to focus, but exhaustion and stress were catching up fast. She felt herself being lowered to the ground, people talking over her, hands checking her pulse. I'm fine, she tried to say, but the words came out slurred. Lieutenant Voss, stay with us. A medic's face appeared above her, concerned. You're in shock, just breathe, you're safe now. Safe. The words seemed strange. She'd been flying for 4 hours, most of it under fire. Her aircraft was destroyed. She knew that even without looking. The damage she'd taken, the landing, the overweight takeoff, all of it had pushed the airframe beyond its limits. But they were all alive, every single person. That's what mattered. She closed her eyes and let the medics work. Later, after they'd cleared her at the hospital and confirmed she wasn't injured, just exhausted, Matilda found herself back in her quarters. She sat on her bunk, still in her flight suit, staring at nothing. There was a knock on the door. Come in. Captain Hendricks entered, followed by Colonel Watkins. Both men looked serious. Matilda started to stand, but Hendricks waved her down. Stay seated, Lieutenant. They pulled up chairs. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Finally, Watkins cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Voss, what you did tonight was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've witnessed in 25 years of service. I'm still trying to decide which." Matilda met his eyes. "Sir, I did what the situation required. You landed an attack aircraft on a dirt road." "Yes, sir." "You loaded Marines onto the exterior of that aircraft." "Yes, sir." "You took off overloaded with enemy forces engaging you through terrain that shouldn't be flyable in those conditions." "Yes, sir." Watkins leaned back. "By every regulation, you should be facing a court-martial. What you did was reckless, dangerous, and completely unauthorized." Matilda's chest tightened. She'd saved lives tonight and they were going to charge her for it. Hendricks spoke up. "However," he pulled out a folder, "Colonel Watkins and I have spent the last 3 hours reviewing the mission. We've spoken to every Marine you extracted, to the Seahawk crew, to the Hornet pilots. We've reviewed your aircraft telemetry and gun camera footage." He opened the folder. "The consensus is that your actions, while unconventional, were the only viable option for preventing casualties. If you hadn't landed, if you hadn't extracted those Marines, they would have been overrun before the Chinook arrived." Watkins nodded. "The Marines are submitting paperwork recommending you for the Navy Cross. That's the highest award below the Medal of Honor. Captain Hendricks and I are endorsing it." Matilda blinked, not sure she'd heard correctly. "Sir, you saved 12 lives tonight, Lieutenant. You flew a mission that should have killed you and somehow brought everyone home. That deserves the highest recognition we can give." "But my aircraft, your aircraft is scrap metal. We're writing it off completely. It'll never fly again." Hendricks smiled slightly. "But aircraft can be replaced. Pilots like you can't." Watkins stood up. "Get some rest, Lieutenant. You've earned it." They left, closing the door behind them. Matilda sat alone in the silence, trying to process what had just happened. The Navy Cross, for landing an aircraft and loading people onto it. It seemed surreal. But as the hours passed and exhaustion finally pulled her towards sleep, she realized something. She'd stopped thinking about proving herself, stopped worrying about being underestimated or judged. She'd simply done what needed doing, without hesitation, without calculation. Maybe that's what heroism actually was. Not seeking glory or recognition, but being the person who stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. She fell asleep with that thought, the last thing she remembered before darkness took her. The Navy Cross ceremony took place 6 weeks later at Bagram, with far more pomp than the Distinguished Flying Cross had received. An admiral flew in from the Pentagon specifically to present it. The citation read in part, "For extraordinary heroism in combat operations against enemy forces, Lieutenant Junior Grade Matilda Voss, displaying exceptional courage under intense enemy fire, completed multiple close air support missions while sustaining significant aircraft damage. When extraction assets were compromised and friendly forces were in danger of being overrun, Lieutenant Voss made the unprecedented decision to land her Thunderbolt aircraft on a contested dirt road under enemy fire. She then extracted 12 personnel by unconventional means and flew her critically damaged aircraft back to base, saving all lives at extreme personal risk. Her actions represent the highest traditions of naval service and reflect great credit upon herself and the United States Navy." Matilda stood at attention while the medal was pinned to her uniform, feeling the weight of it, heavier than the Distinguished Flying Cross, both physically and symbolically. The assembled crowd included every pilot on base, Marines from multiple units, and senior leadership from across the theater. When the ceremony ended and people came to congratulate her, Kovich approached with his entire team. They'd been awarded medals, 2 Bronze Stars and Purple Hearts. "Ma'am," Kovich said formally, then broke into a grin. "I mean, Lieutenant Badass." Matilda laughed, surprised. "That's not my call sign." "It should be. Runt doesn't fit anymore. You're not the underestimated one anymore. Everyone knows your name now." It was true. The story of the mission had spread not just through Bagram but throughout the entire theater. Other pilots asked her for details, wanting to know how she'd managed the landing, the takeoff, the flight back. Marines she'd never met thanked her, telling her she'd changed how they thought about air support. But with recognition came pressure, exactly as Captain Hendricks had warned. Every flight now carried expectations. People watched her differently, treated her differently. The comfortable anonymity of being just another pilot was gone. She found herself missing it sometimes. Over the following months, Matilda completed her deployment and rotated back to the United States. She was assigned to an A-10 training squadron, teaching new pilots the techniques and procedures she'd learned through years of combat. It was strange at first, being the instructor rather than the student, but she discovered she was good at it. She could explain complex concepts simply, demonstrate techniques clearly, and most importantly, she could tell students the truth about combat aviation. Not the sanitized version from textbooks, but the real thing, the fear, the decisions, the weight of responsibility. One afternoon, she was walking across the flight line at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base when she saw a young woman, barely 5 feet tall, standing beside an A-10. The woman was looking up at the aircraft with an expression Matilda recognized, a mixture of awe and determination. Matilda approached. "Can I help you?" The woman turned, startled. "Oh, sorry, ma'am, I was just looking. I'm starting flight training next month. I've heard the A-10 is hard to fly." "It is," Matilda agreed. "But that's not why you're worried, is it?" The woman hesitated, then shook her head. "I'm worried because I'm small. Everyone says I won't be able to handle it physically, that I should aim for something smaller, lighter." Matilda smiled. "What's your name?" "Emily Chen." "Well, Emily, let me tell you something. I'm 5'2" and I've flown the A-10 in combat for 4 years. I've put it down on a dirt road under enemy fire and taken off with Marines clinging to the wings. The aircraft doesn't care about your size. It cares about your skill and your determination." Emily's eyes widened. "You're Runt, Lieutenant Voss, I've read about you." "Then you know size doesn't matter. What matters is whether you're willing to do the hard work, whether you'll fly into situations that scare you, whether you'll put other people's lives ahead of your own comfort." Matilda gestured to the A-10. "This aircraft will test you every single day. It'll demand perfection and punish mistakes, but if you give it everything you have, it'll give you the ability to save lives. That's the deal." Emily nodded slowly. "Did you ever want to quit?" "Every day for the first 2 years. The training was brutal. People doubted me constantly. I failed check rides, crashed in simulators, got told I wasn't good enough." Matilda paused. "But I kept showing up. That's the secret, not being perfect, just being persistent." "Thank you, ma'am, that helps." Emily started to walk away, then turned back. "Can I ask one more thing?" "Sure. Are you glad you stuck with it, despite everything?" Matilda looked at the A-10, thinking about all the missions, all the close calls, all the people she'd protected. "Yeah," she said finally. "I'm glad. This job cost me a lot, but it gave me more purpose, pride, the knowledge that I made a difference." "That's what I want," Emily said quietly. "Then go get it, and don't let anyone tell you you're too small. Use it. Let them underestimate you, then prove them wrong." Emily smiled and walked away. Matilda watched her go, seeing herself 10 years earlier. Young, determined, facing a world that didn't think she belonged. But she'd carved out a place anyway, through skill and courage and sheer stubborn refusal to quit. As the sun set over Davis-Monthan and the A-10s cast long shadows across the tarmac, Matilda thought about legacy. Not medals or awards, but the impact you left on people. The lives you saved. The barriers you broke down for those who came after. That's what mattered. That's what lasted. She walked back toward the squadron building, ready for tomorrow's training flights, ready to teach the next generation what she'd learned. The call sign Runt would follow her forever, a reminder of where she'd started. But it no longer felt like an insult. It felt like a badge of honor, proof that you could be small and still cast a giant shadow, that you could be underestimated and still be exceptional. That size was just a number, and what really mattered was the size of your courage when the moment demanded it.